First of all, Kate, you seem to be somewhere online. Is that correct?
I am. I'm here. It's good to join you.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Again, thanks for accepting our invitation. Some of you might, Kate, but I'm sure all of you know the Doughnut Economics because it's such a lively picture. Kate is next to teaching at Oxford and Amsterdam. Her passion is to making economics fit for the 21st century. So she moved on from an idea into a book, the Doughnut Economics, which was listed on many long lists of the Financial Times, McKinsey Business Book of the Year Award, etc., etc. But apart from just thinking and teaching and writing, we also know Kate as a doer, going into action, and she translated her ideas together with cities, businesses, communities, governments into reality. So we're all very much, Kate, looking forward to how you shape your ideas and how you put them into practice in order to have those radical ideas transform into action. Floor is yours, Kate.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you all today. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to talk about the donut, the one donut that actually turned out to be good for us. And I'm going to start with the fact that the 21st century has begun with multiple crises. We know this. From the financial meltdown of 2008 to the era of climate ecological breakdown to COVID lockdown. And these are reported in different ways in the news. But I believe they send us the same signal that the systems we've created that presume that success lies in endless expansion, it doesn't work. And when you aim to endlessly expand, you destroy the life supporting systems on which you depend. You destroy the social systems on which we all depend. So we need a new shape of progress, no longer endless expansion. Instead of this, I propose a shape of progress that, yes, it looks like a donut. So the goal here is to leave nobody in the hole in the middle of the donut, falling short on the essentials of life. That's where people don't have the resources they need for life's essentials of food and water, healthcare, education, housing, political voice. I crowdsourced these 12 social dimensions from the world's governments, from the Sustainable Development Goals. So they have the backing of every government in the world. Leave nobody in the hole. But, and it's a big but, at the same time, as we collectively use Earth's resources, we must not overshoot the ecological ceiling where we put so much pressure on the life support systems of this planet that we begin to kick them out of balance. That's where we cause climate breakdown. We acidify the oceans, we create air pollution and biodiversity loss. And these, of course, are the 9 planetary boundaries recognized by Earth system scientists little more than a decade ago. This is such new understanding of on what our lives depend. In the simplest of terms, we must meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And for me, this is the starting point of 21st century economics. I wish it had been the starting point of my economics degree in the early 1990s. If we had all begun here in the 90s, I think we would be in a much, much stronger position today. If this is the goal, no longer endless expansion, but thriving in a dynamic balance, then we are very far from that balance. All the red shows here. On food, that red wedge goes 11% of the way to the middle, because 11% of people don't have enough food to eat every day. You can see there's shortfall on every one of these social dimensions, and we know this. People around the world cannot meet their most essential needs. And yet collectively, we've already overshot multiple planetary boundaries on climate, on excessive fertilizer use, excessive land conversion, and we are breaking down the web of life with biodiversity loss. So to me, this is our collective selfie, and this is our 21st century challenge. To be the generation that sees this for the first time and says, we are now going to turn this story around. We are going to bring humanity out of that hole in the middle and bring the whole of humanity back within planetary boundaries. We have to remind ourselves that last century's economic theories and government policies and business models and indeed philanthropy practices were not designed to solve for this. So we would never imagine that they would get us there. We need to come up with theories and policies and business models and philanthropy and community action of our own that is designed to solve for this. And for some people, that's an overwhelming challenge, and others, that's a phenomenal opportunity. This picture I'm showing you is at the global scale. And I believe it's the picture for which our children's children will judge and remember us. What did we do once that we knew and once that we saw this? But most of what we do doesn't happen at the global level. We bring it down to the national level. So let me bring this down to the national level. 3 national donuts. Malawi on around $1,000 per person per year. Many people falling short in that hole of deprivation, not overshooting its pressure on the planet on a per capita basis at all. China in the middle there, both falling short and in overshoot. And then Australia, I could have picked many countries. I could have picked Denmark or Norway or other high-income countries that people think of as this is the best country in the world to live. We've got great lifestyle, we've got great natural resources, but actually on a consumption basis, all high-income countries are massively overshooting their pressure on the planet. This is the consumption recorded in the food and clothing and electronics and consumer goods and construction materials that are imported into high-income countries and the waste stream that is exported out. Let me take these 3 and put them in a chart of over 150. The sweet spot is that top left-hand corner where we meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. And you can see that there's not a country in the world that's there. And to me, this means no country in the world should say, we are a developed nation. We are an advanced nation. There aren't any. This wipes the slate clean. We are all in the process of transformation on an unprecedented journey towards that space. No country's ever made this journey before, not the low-income ones, not the middle-income countries, and certainly not the high-income countries. So this, to me, signs deep humility and unprecedented ambition in every nation. And let's remember that these dots stand apart on the page. They are, of course, deeply interconnected through histories of colonialism and military power, through current trade and finance rules and resource extraction, through current and future impacts of climate change from the global north to the global south. So we also need to see a transformation in the relationships between nations. How are we going to get there? We need to transform the dynamics of our economy, because this picture shows us that we have inherited a deeply degenerative economy that is running down the life support systems of planet Earth. And we've inherited a deeply divisive global economy that leaves millions, billions without their basic needs and others massively over-consuming. So we need to transform 2 fundamental dynamics. One is to become regenerative, the other is to become distributive. So we've inherited degenerative linear industrial systems, take, make, use, and lose. And we need to transform them at the level of nations, at the level of cities, within business, within communities, within schools, within our homes. We need to become regenerative by design so that resources are not used up. They are used again and again for more carefully, collectively, creatively, and slowly. But at the same time, we've inherited economies that are divisive, whether through regulation, through inheritance, through infrastructure. They capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few. And that won't get us into the donut. We need to create economies that are distributive by design, where opportunity and value are shared far more equitably with all who co-created. And that turns out to be the whole of society. What could these look like in practice? Just from one example from the sector of housing. Regenerative design. The city of Amsterdam has committed to being 100% circular by 2050, 50% circular by 2030. They're leading in doing this in the construction sector. This is a shot from an experimental district in Amsterdam, where all the building there must be circular. Housing, offices, the materials must have a passport of where they've come from and where they can then be reused in the future. They are putting out tenders in the city to say the circular tendering in built environment will all be circular from 2023. In Portland, Oregon, there's a deconstruction rule that every house of a certain age cannot be knocked down. It must be taken down tile by tile and timber by timber so that these can then be reused. Again, both of these are part of creating a circular economy in the space of construction. In distributive design and housing, in Chile, the architect Alejandro Aravena realized that many people would never be able to afford to buy their own home. They would be stuck in the rental market forever. But many people could buy half a house. So he designed half houses. You could buy half a house with all the heating and the plumbing and the electricity it needs. And when you've saved up enough money, you can fill the rest in. And through this sheer design, he opened up house ownership to many people who would otherwise have been rentiers forever. And then in Vienna, More than 60% of people in that city live in socially owned housing by the city or city-run cooperatives. It's affordable, it's central, it's normal, it is equalizing in terms of access to good accommodation in the city. So just two examples of regenerative and distributive by design. Let's bring it down to the level of the city, because this is where we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab have been most working. Cities, particularly from the global north, first approached us and said, we want to use these ideas in our city. How can we do that? So what we do is we say, let's open up the donut, unroll it, and open up a space inside. And we can envision a future we want between that social foundation and the ecological ceiling. Let's think about life here in this city, but also how this city is connected to everywhere. And then we can turn it into a canvas for imagining a different future. So we invite every city to ask itself this question: how can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And you can hear inside there's a multitude of questions. So the first one is, how can all of the people of our city thrive? What does it mean to thrive here? That answer is going to be different in Bamako or Berlin or Mumbai or Stockholm, depending on the culture, the history, the values, people who have been there decades, centuries, and people who have newly arrived. How can everybody be healthy, enabled with the skills they need, connected with transport and technology, and socially and empowered to contribute and benefit from society? How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? Every city is located in a unique place on Earth's surface, nestled in a particular part of her biosphere, whether up a mountain or in a valley, in the tropics or in a desert. And nature has a genius for thriving there. So what is the wildland next door doing of your city? How is the wildland cleansing the air and housing biodiversity, storing carbon, cooling the air from the treetops to the forest floor, cycling fresh water? And how can your city aspire to match or exceed that generosity of nature? This is the work of Janine Benyus, one of the leading biomimicry thinkers who worked together with us on this portrait. These are the local aspirations, thriving people in a thriving place. But every city depends upon a global network of people and the planet. So we must put it in that context and also ask, how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? How can we cut our carbon emissions so that we come back within planetary boundaries? How do we cut our material footprint, our fertilizer use, through how we eat and travel and live and shop? But also thinking of all the products in those global supply chains. Think of the people that the city is connected to. How can our city respect the well-being of people worldwide, the workers who pick and pack the food, who stitch and sew the clothes, who dig and transport the construction materials? How can their and their communities' rights be respected? These are the four lenses of what it means to do the city portrait. And this is what it looks like when we do that. We've done it in Philadelphia, Portland, and Amsterdam. As you can tell, this is pre-COVID. So policymakers from different aspects of education and sewage and transport and racial equality and health and housing coming together in a meeting, seeing their issues around a common frame and able to look at holistic interconnections across that frame. And it was very powerful doing this work with them. I just want to dive in deeper, because what they said to us was, if we are going to transform the way we actually create outcomes in our city, we need to transform the way we work. And we looked then into the deep design of cities. Why are some cities still saying, how can we make our city grow? Mayors and deputy mayors say to us, you know, we've just inherited this mindset that what we should be doing is trying to grow, and that we must show our city GDP, and that is the metric of our success. But actually, that's not what people here want. That's not what measures good life here. We want to thrive. And the donut is a much better representation of those values. So how can we pivot from focusing on endless growth to thriving as a place? And we think there are 5 key design traits that really help a city look at that. So what is your purpose as a city? Amsterdam has adopted a new purpose. I'll share it in a moment. What is your vision of who you are, your ambition and leadership? How do you network, whether you're part of progressive city alliances? How do you network with your residents in the city? How do you network with businesses and industry and share your values and vision through those networks? How do you govern yourselves? Who has voice in decision-making? What are the metrics of success? What are the principles and practices that you follow? Do you adopt experimentation? How do you make way for the uncertainty of the future? And then crucially, how is the city owned? Who owns the land and housing? In Vienna, that made all the difference. Who owns the utilities? Paris recently brought back under public control its water provisioning because it realized there's so much more it could do having control over it than having it privatized. Who owns the businesses? Are they multinational corporations only, or are small local enterprises encouraged and enabled in your city? Who owns the data, which we know is a crucial asset of the future? And crucially then, how is the city financed? Where does financing come from? A surprising number of cities depend for a lot of their city finance on car parking charges. If they want to create a car-free city centre, where is that finance going to come from? Many cities depend upon the charge that they charge to retailers and restaurants in the city centre, the rates, business rates. And COVID has closed those down, so they're starved of cash. Where can they bring that back from? Must they force everybody back into commuting? Real questions around how finance enables a city to serve its purpose. So we take the cities on this journey, exploring the five dimensions, and then say, how is your city being drawn back? And how can you already move forward across the way you're designed as a city? And let's recognize that some of this is within the powers of your municipality, but some of it is at the national level, some of it might be the European or the regional level, some of it is international. So let's use this to map with post-it notes all of the places where we're pulled back by our design, where we can pivot forward across that spectrum of regions. What can we already stop doing because it's within our power? What can we already start doing because it's in our power? What do we need to work with others and allies to do to make wider, deeper, longer changes? Pulling out of this, I'll tell a quick story from Amsterdam. So Amsterdam knew that they wanted to become a circular economy and embed that policy in the heart of their decision-making. And they wanted to use the donut as a concept for doing that, so that they created a holistic vision of what it means to be a circular economy. So they held many workshops, familiarizing people with the concept of the donut, mapping it against their own existing city targets. They created their own donut, orange, of course, and then came up with this new vision for the city as a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents, while respecting the planetary boundaries. Now that's a visionary purpose, but it has to be backed up, of course, by the networks, governance, ownership, and finance that make it come true. They then put in place a vision for the circular economy, a commitment through regulation with, you can see the donut at the top of the picture there, and then the circular strategy drawn out from it. 100% circular by 2050, 50% circular by 2030, 10% circular procurements by next year. So bringing the pioneers forward and rewarding them for being at the front, not at the back of transformation. And then using new metrics that monitor whether or not that circularity is beginning. Because of course, if we have new dynamics of being regenerative and distributive, we're going to need a completely different set of metrics to tell us whether or not we're getting there. Amsterdam launched its Doughnut City Portrait in April 2020. It was the month of the highest infection rate of COVID-19 in that city. But they still launched because they said, we may be an emergency, but as we emerge from emergency, who do we want to become? And we need to pivot towards that future. We published our city portrait methodology very soon after, and then rapidly through peer-to-peer inspiration, many places said they wanted to follow. So Cornwall, for example, took the donut concept and made their own local decision-making wheel. Every infrastructural project that goes through Cornwall County Council must be assessed against this wheel. Any red must be mitigated. We must transform the design so that it is bringing us as a county into the donut. Brussels region, the Secretary of State for Economic Transition wanted to do the donut for the region, and so worked with a local organization who have beautifully brought it into image and made it very accessible, those 4 lenses of the donut, and they're now working with it at multiple scales. And then Melbourne in Australia, 40 organizations, 600 people got involved in a wide conversation of what does it mean to thrive here? And they came up with their own vision of thriving in their own version of the donut. So, but to also accompany this city-led work has been citizen and civic-led work. In Amsterdam, a group of change makers across the city said, we're all using the donut in our work. Let's get together and make the Doughnut Coalition. And again, through peer-to-peer inspiration, they inspired, by publicizing that, they inspired groups all over the place, nationally and locally, to set up other groups, coalitions in their own place where they want to bring about transformation. And now they are self-organizing, which to me tells you this has got its own momentum. I've never actually been on a call with these folks. They are self-organizing and taking it into their work and figuring out as a team how it makes sense to bring these ideas into practice. So let me pull back and say, if we want to get into the donut, and every country needs to transform, this is the time for transformation everywhere. We are all developing nations now. We need to transform the dynamics of our nations and cities from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive. We believe the city portrait is a useful tool for diving in of what it means to be thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet, and using that framework of thinking through a place's powers to act so that they can indeed bring about transformation. And I'll stop there. And I'm really happy just to turn this into a discussion, hear your responses, challenges, and any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Wow, what a talk. Very enlightening and very comprehensive and very engaging. Thanks so much. And it was very refreshing for me to see not only that there is an idea, but that you also manage with your whole team to turn it into practice, even up to the level where you can change colors of the donut for the Dutch. That was a precondition. I would invite all of you to put some questions in the chat. I'm going to start with one question, and then I'm going to take my time to read through the chat and ask you some questions. My first question is, we're a membership organization where we have large foundations and social investors as our members in Europe. You highlighted on this very ambitious and very needed journey that you need many players coming to the table to make it happen. Do you have a particular message for grant makers and social investors in this space? Do you see a particular role you would think they should step forward to?
Oh, it's a great question. So we, Doughnut Economics Action Lab, are a tiny team of 8 people at the moment. And we're very aware that the work that we're doing is big teamwork in the sense that it takes an ecosystem of change makers to bring this work about. So many of the cities and places that are contacting us, we're not looking for contracts. If they come to us, they say, would you come and do this work with us? And we say, well, we're not a consultancy, so we don't do this work, but we depend upon sharing these ideas in the commons with a wide range of organizations and change makers in your city, in your region, in your own language, who can then take these ideas. Those coalitions, those local coalitions I showed, the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition and others that are springing up, there's an amazing energy there amongst them. And I know that many of them are saying, how do we find the finance to actually enable this initiative to come bottom up? So the first point I'm making is it takes an ecosystem to bring about change. And the more that funders can recognize and support that ecosystem-wide network that needs to exist, it's never going to be one organization and one team. There's a dependency about bringing about an ecosystem of change makers who are working together. So look for the collaborative skills. Who is now, which potential grantees, I would say, are saying, well, of course we put our ideas in the commons. If we are funded, then we see ourselves as producing goods for the commons. We collaborate and we hold this as a high value skill. We recognize that we're evolving. So bringing that systems thinking and open design qualities, those are the organizations we certainly like working with best, because we're all focused on a goal rather than focused on ourselves and totally the opposite of competing, but collaborating. Yep. The second I would say is, of course, we're trying to bring about system change. It's long, it's difficult, and you never know exactly where it's going to happen. So we've been very lucky to work with funders to whom we've said, we cannot tell you, and we would not want to tell you, we're going to hold this conference, do this piece of work, boom, 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 boom. It's not linear. We are evolving we're responding to a fast evolving situation. No one saw COVID. None of us can yet see the next thing coming. So please recognize that we will always be agilely moving to where those opportunities are emerging, using smart criteria, but we are adaptive and we want the work to emerge. And that's been very, very important for us, not to be tied down to very set targets that you then just become ticking off a tick list of things that you promised to do before you knew what the real work was ahead of you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. I'm going to go through some questions. First question, Olivia, I'm going to interpret a bit your question, is bringing in the digital economy. And more than that, also, we consumers getting addicted to the digital economy. How do you bring in the consumer that is, as Olivier is writing down, ordering parcels every day, a couple to be delivered at their home? So how do you bring in the consumers and the consciousness of the consumer in this whole game?
Really interesting. So first of all, we start by saying that the economy, actually I have a cardboard cutout. The benefits of lockdown is you make everything in cardboard cutout. See, one of the slides I didn't show you is you start by recognizing the economy is embedded in society, embedded in the living world, right? This is where mainstream economics never actually begins and should begin. And that the economy is made up of the market and the state. That was the 20th century boxing match, but also the household of unpaid caring work and the commons. And then we all play many roles. So mainstream economics would talk to each of us and say we're either consumer or producer. In fact, I can pop behind here, you see consumer. There's a consumer and the producer. But this is just one of our many roles in society. We're also public servant, resident, voter, protester. We're parent, child, carer, guardian, steward, co-creator, repairer, and volunteer. So first of all, we need to get out of allowing business and society to curate us as consumers. A lot of city spaces are constructed to make us consume, and the advertising is inviting us to believe that the best thing we can do on Saturday is go to the shopping mall. So how do we get out of that? Or indeed, the best thing we can do anytime is to click on Amazon or buy that next parcel. How do we get out of that? And I think part of the first step in that is, of course, moving towards an economy of experiences where there are public spaces where people can come together and meet and connect, but also a circular economy so that we don't assume that we're purchasing all the time, but actually things can be repaired. This is a profound psychological change because we've had 100 years of consumer advertising and inbuilt obsolescence. It's really important that the European Union has recently recognized the right to repair that must now be built into all products that are sold. It now needs to be made real at the community level of actually the action, the ability to repair yourself, and to turn this from a strange marginal pastime to something central to our lives, to celebrate. As I said, we need to use resources more carefully and more creatively. So what if instead of a shopping mall, you could go to somewhere that was full of objects that have been repaired and refurbished, and you can take something there to be mended or to be passed on. I really think this is going to be an important part, a psychological part of it, of transforming our relationships to objects. So it's deep, profound work.
Yeah. So providing alternatives and lowering the boundaries for the consumers to step into those alternatives.
Yes, and to stop being consumers and become citizens and community members.
Yes.
And commoners.
Then two questions that relate. Some people were surprised that Vietnam came out so well. Maybe a few words.
Yes, so and Vietnam seems to be an outlier. Like, why Vietnam? So when you think about, so let me explain why it's there, and then I'll explain why maybe it shouldn't quite be there. One of the reasons why it's there is actually relative to many countries of its income level. And that Vietnam has always invested in health and education. It always has been a good, strong performer in those aspects. And in terms of its actually domestic consumption, it hasn't got such a high one as the high income countries. So it's been more productive in spending on health and education and the basic essentials of life relative to its income and therefore its impact on consumption. However, if somebody were in Vietnam, they would say, hey, don't tell me my country is closest to living in the donut. The air is polluted, the soil is polluted, some of the water is polluted. So that's why we need to do the four lens approach. If we took Vietnam through the four lens approach, there would be many aspects that wouldn't look so well there. Colleagues of mine who are developing these national donuts say, actually, in a way, Vietnam popping up there, it was almost like a 1 or 2 year outlier. They did quite well on some indicators that they're not doing so well on anymore. Countries that might look better over the long term would be Costa Rica and Colombia. These are two of several examples that I could pull out that are nearly meeting the needs of all people, almost within the means of the planet. And they're very important examples to recognize because it means that it could be possible, because we've never actually tried to do this yet. No country's tried to do it. We're just beginning to aim to do it. So there are some countries that are closer than others.
Oh, thank you. Another question. We still have time for 1 or 2 questions, if that's okay with you, Kate.
Fine, yeah.
Yeah. That's something we as a community are often asking ourselves and questioning a little bit the side of the investors. You know that big money talks. It's a question of Idris, and big money can move big parts. Do you feel comfortable, and are you optimistic that also traditional investors will play their role in moving everything within the donut, so to speak?
When you say traditional investors, do you mean mainstream financial investors looking for financial return out of companies?
No, the first one. Traditional investors like also pension funds, but the big fund managers and so on and so forth. I think that's your question, Idris, right?
Yeah, I'm not
right,
optimistic.
Right,
yes.
Yes, right. So not us, the group of the passionate impact investors, but let's say those
the mainstream
mass of money. Yes.
No, I'm not optimistic at all that that's just going to happen. Not at all. Another thing I made earlier on a piece of paper. God, it's my signboard again. I never travel without this. This is crucial. So it's those same 5 design traits that I was talking about with the cities. They're very, very, very useful for any organization. I invite every one of you to look at the design of your own institution through these 5 design traits. But on finance, right? What is the purpose of that fund? Often the purpose, and they might say it's our legal purpose, is to deliver the maximum financial returns, in which case we can be in trouble because we know that finance aims to deliver the maximum returns and actually often skews us away from the long-term social and ecological returns we need. So I think we need to reinvent finance. I mean, to me, and even some of the major multinational companies, think of Unilever. They almost had a hostile takeover bid, and then they managed to rescue themselves. Think of Emmanuel Faber, the CEO of Danone, the beloved example of mainstream multinationals becoming a B Corp. Well, the investors want their double-digit returns, and so they oust the CEO because he's serving too much purpose. So I think there's a profound conflict between, let me think of businesses now, that are actually delivering things in the real economy. Businesses that are delivering, whether they're food or clothing or housing, some of them may have transformative purpose, but if they are owned by mainstream shareholders who want and then investor institutions that want those mainstream returns, you've got a huge tension between these two. And to me, Unilever and Danone are the 2 standout examples of a CEO, Paul Pullman and Emmanuel Faber, who tried to turn their company into a generative future, tried to give it purpose, social, environmental credentials, tried to make it B Corp, tried to use alternative metrics. But ultimately, they were both punished by the mainstream capital markets who forced them into a takeover bid or forced them out of the company. To me, this is proof that we are nowhere close to having redesigned finance to be in service to life. And to me, it's the biggest redesign job that needs to happen.
Right. This leads maybe in a final question, which is a question from Deirdre. By the way, I see in the chat that you already inspired a lot of people, even to the personal level, refurbishing their apartment and so on and so forth. So yeah, you have impact already. Great. But coming back to Deirdre's question, given this very tough, long journey we're heading for, who are your natural allies and who are your, I would say, natural opposition? You already mentioned finance, traditional finance, but who would you kind of see as your natural allies and opposition?
So what I've learned, it's a great question. What I've learned so my book, Doughnut Economics, came out in 2017, and I went around giving presentations. And after every presentation, people would come up to me and say, I'm actually doing this. I'm a teacher and I'm teaching this in my classroom not because it's on the curriculum, it's not yet, but the students deserve to learn it. And by the way, it's now on the curriculum in many curricula, which is great. I'm a town councillor and I'm taking this into our next town hall meeting. I'm an employee or a CEO and I'm taking it into our company boardroom. I'm a community activist and I'm taking it into our next meeting. People doing it. I've just been blown away by change makers who pop up everywhere. As residents, as leaders, as ordinary citizens who have a vision and have a conviction. And it all starts here in the conviction of someone, and they see the donut and they think that is a useful tool for the transformation that I already wanted to bring about. So those are our natural allies. And we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab exist to work in service of their transformatory journey. So we co-create tools with them. We work particularly with the pioneers, and we then put whatever we made in the commons and enable others to use it. Those are the natural allies. I'm just blown away that there are change makers marching in the street. There are also change makers quietly changing the tax code on the inside. So people working in every position to bring about that bigger, longer term transformation. And that's why I always say this is big teamwork, and let's recognize that it takes this big team. Who are those opposed? I would say it's actually when you come down, even in governments, it's the Treasury and it's the Department of very traditional mainstream financially economic thinking that says we must generate financial return. And whether that's very conservative economic thinking in a Treasury, or very self-interested thinking in a company, or indeed in an individual. That idea that I can accumulate endlessly, and indeed that's what I'm going to do, and that's what we must do, because it's just this profound, when finance continues to rule, and finance still wants its double-digit returns, even while we're literally killing the planet, but finance wants its returns, and the power of that finance to then actually pervert governance through its influence over governments, and its ability to transnationally to just make government, they're beginning to attempt to do something about it. But that power of finance, to me, so it comes down to that. We really do profoundly need to remake finance so that it's in service to life. And that's why impact investment, impact philanthropy, banks that have the Global Alliance on Banking on Values, these new financial organizations and movements and networks that are actually proving that finance can be in service to something other than itself is crucial.
So we need some new DNA in the traditional economic thinking and the traditional finance. So pressure should be on, or let's hope next generation is also bringing some good stuff to the table.
Yes.
Teaching all the pupils, all the new generations. So that's very rewarding. Thanks so much in sake of time. And we have another extraordinary AGM in 10 minutes time. Kate, let me thank you so much for this inspiring talk and the very, very strong narrative of the Doughnut. I hope you enjoyed it as well, but on behalf of EVPA and all our members, thanks so much, and good luck with all the progress you're making. Thank you.
Thank you. I did very much enjoy it. Great questions, and I will share. I'll share the slides so that if anybody wants to have a look at them again, you are also very welcome. So thank you. See you on the way in this big teamwork.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Being with us.